Hi, my name is Dylan. I'm from South Africa. I'm not here as a psychologist or a neuroscientist. In fact, the information that follows is drawn from research over many years from people far more intelligent than me. But I am here as a teacher, as a global citizenship education educator who's worked with thousands of teachers over many years. And the conclusion I've come to over the many years I've been doing this work is that the starting point for how we teach global citizenship education, what we teach, and sometimes, as we'll see, who we teach to and who we turn our attention to, these teachings, this learning, it begins with us. It begins with you. It begins with who you are as the person standing in front of the classroom or working with young people in various environments, informally and formally, after-school programs, extended education programs. However it is that we find ourselves working with young people in global citizenship education, wherever we are in the world, the learning we hope that these young people will get, it really does begin with us. How we see ourselves, how we see the world, how we see the people around us, and how we see the young people in our classrooms, in front of us. We're human beings. We don't come into classrooms as these empty vessels with young people. We bring our perceptions, our views, our history into these classrooms. And all of these shape how we treat and teach young people. And for a lot of the time, much of how we see and interact with the world around us and the people around us happens unconsciously. Let me give an example from when I was a teacher. As I said, I'm South African. I grew up during apartheid. I grew up as a white South African who hardly ever interacted with my fellow black South Africans. But I was raised to believe that apartheid was wrong and that we shouldn't judge people based on the color of their skin. And of course, I still believe that. When I began my history teaching career 20 odd years ago, I taught in a post-apartheid society. I taught a multiracial group of young people, black and white South Africans, very different from the experience I had when I was growing up. When I started teaching, I believed strongly that I didn't see color. I didn't see black and white South Africans in front of me, black and white learners. I just saw South Africans. And my role was to turn them into, I guess, great global citizens. And I really saw myself as trying to nurture this and to nurture this group of active, caring, democratic citizens who would emerge from my classroom. But I guess unbeknownst to me then, and what research now tells us, is that while that kind of conscious part of my brain didn't see color, the unconscious part of my brain, that did see color. The part of my brain that I'm not aware of, that didn't just see South Africans, that saw black and white South Africans. And what research also tells us now is that without me being aware of it, I most likely treated the black children and the white children very differently. In fact, I'm without a doubt that because of the society that I grew up in, which saw white as better than black, that unconsciously in my teaching, I most likely favored white students over black students. I most likely, unconsciously, called on the white students to answer more questions or more often, and unconsciously probably valued their opinion over the black learners in my class. But let me reiterate, this was happening unconsciously. The conscious part of my brain truly did believe I didn't see color, and I was treating everyone the same, but I wasn't. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. That as global citizenship educators, we need to understand more of who we are as teachers, more of our thinking, more of how our thinking works, especially that unconscious part of our brain. Because if we don't, we may end up just like I was, believing I was creating a fair, just, equal environment and society, while in actual fact, my unconscious part of the brain wasn't being very fair or very equal. I want to share a few insights into what I now know about how my brain works when I stand in front of a classroom of young people or teachers who are different to me. And the first thing I want to talk about is groups and how our brain reacts to the groups we find ourselves in and interacting with and teaching to. So here are just a few things we know about the psychology of groups, which I think are relevant to us as educators. First of all, people form groups. The brain is hardwired to find and belong to groups. We all do it. We're built naturally. And our brain does this because groups give us pride. They give us self-esteem and a sense of belonging. And so we're attracted to finding groups where we feel we belong, where we feel we are in, our kind of in-groups. This is what we are hardwired to do. So if our in-group appears to us as cleverer, funnier, safer than others, we feel better about being a part of that group, and we're attracted to that group and want to spend more time in it. But to make us feel even better about ourselves, our brain likes to discriminate against what we call the out-group. If the other groups out there are less funny, less clever, we feel less safe around them, then we feel better about our in-group and we want to spend more time and belonging in that space. But what's interesting about in-groups and out-groups is how we see the people in the groups that we belong to and the groups we don't belong to. So let's take the in-groups. When I'm in the in-group, for whatever group I'm a part of, I see the members of that in-group as individuals. I'll remember their names more easily. I'll remember individual characteristics about them. If there are any differences, because maybe some people aren't as funny as all the rest that I think are, my brain accepts that. It just washes over that. What's important is when I leave that in-group, I remember the positive interactions that I've had, very little of the negative. In fact, I'll recall contributions that people made. I'll recall contributions that individuals made. I'll work harder for the in-group, and I'm prepared to make sacrifices. So naturally, that's the place I want to stay and where I feel I belong and where everyone else wants me there. When it comes to the out-group, my brain sees everyone as the same. It finds it difficult to remember individual characteristics about the group and even people's names. In fact, when I leave that group, my brain only remembers the negative information. It forgets the positive moments I may have shared in that particular group. I forget contributions that individuals have made. I'm not willing to put in as much effort, and I don't offer support. These conclusions of in-groups and out-groups is not just what I believe, it's what psychologists over years have been studying have come to these conclusions. But what's really interesting about in-groups and out-groups is the feelings we have when we're in these spaces. So when I'm with my in-group, the place that I feel I belong and I'm a part of, I feel trust, I feel worth, I feel self-esteem, and I feel security. But when I move to that out-group, the one where I forget their contributions, don't see them as individuals, when I'm with them, I feel anxiety, I feel distrust, unfamiliarity, and hostility. So it makes sense why I want to spend a lot more time in my in-group and why I do spend time in my in-group. And in fact, when people like me say, go out and meet people who are different to yourself, as you move towards those spaces of difference, you feel more anxiety, you feel more hostility. And so we tend to stick in our in-groups. But the more we stick with our in-group, the more it confirms for our brain why we don't like the out-group. So we stick in our in-groups because it doesn't feel so good when we step into the space of our out-group. But the more we stick within our in-group, the more it confirms for our brain why we don't like spending time with the out-group. And many of these feelings for and attitudes against our out-group, they're all happening unconsciously. In fact, 98% of how our brain works with emotions, feelings, and biases happens without our control. That means that 98% of how we feel about out-groups, those feelings of anxiety and distrust, that's happening unconsciously. So let's look a little bit deeper at what happens in the unconscious part of our brain.